Hi, and welcome to CGI's Women in Tech Career Lab session, Visualizing the Future, Women Leading IT Architecture. My name's Sarah Walk. I'm a solution architect based here in beautiful Victoria, BC. And today I'm joined with Cheryl Walker, a data architect based in Edmonton, and Nicole Hattie, business architect in Vancouver, BC. So first thing to note when we talk about architecture, within tech and consulting, there are many types of architects, each specializing in a different area. So as a solution architect, I design and oversee the implementation of complex IT systems to solve business problems for our clients. So I am ultimately responsible for ensuring that those technology solutions that our teams develop and implement align with our clients' goals. I specialize specifically in cloud and data, focusing on leveraging cloud computing, AI, analytics to drive innovation with our clients. Fortunately, with CGI, we're an agnostic company. So this means I get to work with all different tools and platforms such as Microsoft Azure, AWS, and Google. Before I move on to the colleagues, my other colleagues to get their thoughts, one thing that's important to note that we're going to discuss further is how seeing beyond today is important and making sure we design our solutions to scale and evolve with business needs. So with that, Cheryl, maybe you can give some insight into your role.
Sure. So I'm a data architect, and data architects do a lot of things. We do stuff with privacy, with taxonomy, with security. But fundamentally, what we do is make sure that data is available in the right place, in the right format, so that we can use it for analysis and decision making, especially as health moves towards that sort of evidence-based decision making, making sure we are able to capture data in a variety of systems that are patient-centric, systems that are health system-centric, wearables, technology devices, and making sure we can sort of consolidate that data and then use it to move things along. Nicole, we met while we were working on some COVID stuff together forever and ever ago, it seems. And that was the first time I'd ever really heard the term business architecture. So maybe why don't you talk about what business architects do?
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. So as a business architect, I'm really focused on helping businesses document and understand what they do. So using things like business capabilities and value streams to map out what an organization does. So we look very high level holistically across the organization at what they're doing, thinking about the people, processes, technology, and really focusing on creating alignment. So alignment between an organization's objectives and all of the different products, services, the projects, project execution, and making sure that all of that design and implementation is being done in alignment with the overall objectives of the organization. And our work tends to be very human-centered. So creating things like customer journeys and really think about the user experience. So it's interestingly, of course, the three of us are in different areas of architecture, and we look at very different things. And this makes sense because there's more than a dozen different types of architecture within IT, enterprise architects, security architects, so many different areas. And some of them are very niche. So as you mentioned, Cheryl, not having heard of what a business architect was. Well, when I went to school, when I was in high school, I didn't know what a business architect, I'd never heard of a business architect doing my undergrad. And we all do get to these positions in different ways. So for me, I actually have a background in project management and international development. And that's what I started my career in. And then looked at moving into a different field. And so I looked into moving into IT. And when I started as a business analyst, just to learn the industry. So I don't have a technology background at all working as a business architect. But then I found that I really loved doing the analysis and all of the working with the clients, really understanding their needs, a lot of problem solving. And so I just continued down that path. And then still hadn't heard of what a business architect was. A few years ago, I was chatting with a colleague and talking about what I love to do. And she actually said to me, she's like, you should look into business architecture. It sounds like a great fit. So some of these positions are really really niche, and you kind of just make your way into them. And I know we all have kind of different paths that we take to get here. Sarah, how did you get into your field?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. That's really interesting. And actually mine is somewhat different. I've come to this role after 20 years of experience, starting with a fairly solid background in a technical background. My degrees are in computer science and business studies and information and knowledge management. So throughout my career, I've worked on technical projects, starting off with IT teams more on client sides. So working with projects that are owned by the business, working with external consultants as a customer. And then later in my career progressed into consulting, so working on the other side of the fence. But over the years, as I've got project experience, my roles have evolved, and so has technology. So it's definitely been a journey fueled by curiosity. And with that, my role on the projects has changed into more strategic positions. So working on larger, more transformational projects, provincial initiatives. And that's really given me an opportunity to acquire new skills. For instance, I mentioned in the intro about the cloud knowledge. Cloud is not something we covered when I was at university, even though I was doing computer science. So that continuous learning, being able to get hands-on with cloud computing, AI, and machine learning as I've worked on projects. So it's really coupling that experience, that hands-on experience, with this continuous learning and continually educating yourself, doing certifications, has led me to this solution architect role, where now I have a broad view over, what a complex, multifaceted solution can look like for a large provincial complex organization. So definitely not something I just arrived at. It has certainly been a journey. Cheryl, curious to know if your journey differs from ours.
Yes and no. I'm probably a little bit in the middle. So I have an undergraduate degree in political science and economics, and I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I did the only other thing I could do, which is get into banking. And I actually got into banking policy. And then from banking policy, I got into process, which took me into that sort of Lean Six Sigma world. And because I had that undergraduate background in economics, I had sort of econometrics and the deep background in stats. And so I became the sort of Six Sigma person when you had to do that heavy duty stats lifting and good old fashioned Minitab that didn't run the other direction. And so I sort of carried on with that sort of data background. When I left banking and got into consulting, I stayed sort of focused in that balanced scorecard process improvement world. And so I sort of kept my hands in data all the time and very much grounded in data. And then as I got more interested in data, I became quite aware of some of our challenges of why wasn't data in the right format? Why wasn't it where? Why couldn't we share it? And so I got into sort of quality and governance problems and how to solve them. And then all of a sudden I looked up and I was a data architect without ever having intended to be. I think one of the things that all three of us have sort of made clear is that there are lots of different paths. Sometimes Sarah chose that path from a fairly early age. Nicole chose that path because it was what she was passionate about and how she could transfer skills. And I sometimes joke that I am a happy accident data architect who continues to love her job. One of the things that becomes really obvious is that collaboration is really, really huge. And so we work with a lot of different people. And that kind of makes sense because I always joke, when you're an architect, you do that pivot work with clients and with other people. And so I obviously, as you might expect, work with solution and enterprise architects a lot. As Sarah mentioned, CGI is a technology agnostic company. So I have worked with very, very technical solution architects. I've worked with lots of enterprise architects who are really focusing on sort of patterns and how we do integrations well and safely. But I also work with a bunch of folks you might not expect. I work with training a lot of the time to help improve data quality right from when our users are putting data in the system. I work with change management to make sure we understand the burden on users. Sometimes I work with end users. Sometimes I get to work with citizens to help them understand their needs. Nicole, knowing that business architects are very central to that process and how companies do business. What does collaboration look like for you?
Yeah, I think I think of it as very similar to what you're saying, that it is kind of a central point of contact between different teams or different individuals on teams. So I find that I'm often in a role where and I think a lot of different types of architects are in roles where we're looking at that big picture, and we're often the person in the room who is stepping back and making sure that that big picture isn't lost, and that we do continue to have that alignment, and also keeping our fingers on what else is happening within an organization or within our related scope areas, to make sure to be the ones in the room to say, well, how does what we're talking about relate or impact what this other team is doing? Or how does that other piece of work that's happening, how is that going to impact what we're trying to do here? So really bringing pieces together and bringing groups and people together to make sure that everything is kind of working in a nice synchronized way. From a specifically business architecture perspective, a lot of that is about the alignment to the business needs, the business objectives, really focusing on the users and the customers, and also doing a lot of consolidating complex information into presentations. So either a pretty visual or a PowerPoint or something like that, that really distills and captures key information at a point in time, that can be really useful tools for communicating and facilitating that alignment, because you have that visual to go back to that very clearly shows how things connect, and sometimes those things really take on a life of their own and make their way to different areas. And it's funny how you then end up having people, architects from other projects coming and saying, oh, I saw this and I see a connection here, right? So a lot of that connecting and big picture type work. Sarah, is there anything else you think we may have missed in our
No, you know what, the main themes I think that are common across any architecture role is the need to gather information, like you said, from various sources and pull it together into some visualization that can be understood by the organization to add value. One thing I'd call out is our roles are dependent upon gathering information. Sometimes that's available in documentation. The reality is, documentation isn't always current or available. So being able to engage the right people, different types of personalities, ask those meaningful questions is really important. And also not just information, but perspectives. We're trying to understand what's happening with organizations today, but we also want to plan for the future. And so sometimes that's a little bit of detective work. Some people, you have to do a little bit of digging before they actually figure out what the requirement is and how to articulate that. So being able to make sense of a lot of information, having strong communication skills, but I'd also add on top of that is building trust. Especially as an external consultant coming into someone's workplace and asking questions, and some tough questions, there can sometimes be, just some, not necessarily resistance, but just some uncertainty for that individual. So making sure that you can be aware of how to engage people and have patience and earn trust is something that all of us probably have to apply to our roles. So those interpersonal skills are very important. Okay, well, while we're talking about clients, I think we've spoken a bit about how we collaborate with the teams, but what's the value we add? I think I touched upon it lightly, that we can take a lot of disparate information, make sense of it, and build a common vision of how an organization can achieve a certain goal, whether that's with their data, business processes, or even technology. I see this as really important because the technology landscape is very complex and confusing nowadays. Technology is embedded in everything we do, which wasn't necessarily the case, say, 10, 20 years ago. So not only is from a solution architect perspective, I see the opportunity to incorporate technology into some new areas, but also just the options available and the integrations. Often an organization is full of many different types of technologies and solutions. How do they all work together? So as a solution architect, I have that responsibility that I can steer our teams through that uncertainty and translate some of these ideas and ambitions into something that's technically viable. And how I will do this with the clients is a lot of collaboration, as we spoke to before. And then what that looks like can be workshops with groups to actually get up and do a whiteboarding session or a virtual whiteboarding session to start putting ideas down and moving things around, looking for relationships, synergies, or even one-on-one interviews with clients. But having that engagement from an executive level all the way down to that subject matter expert level. So very different personas, and making sure that we use the right engagement method based on the individual. Cheryl, what's your experience, like how you add value and how you engage clients?
I love you answered that both technically and non-technically. So, I mean, from a technical perspective, so often we think that evidence-informed decision just sort of happens because data is laying around. And data is everywhere, but good data that's in the right format, data that's the right level of granularity, data that we can trust, that's increasingly rare. And so a lot of what I do is much more technical work, making sure that that data is good quality, that we can use it, that it's where people need to be, that we've sorted out governance and ownership. And so, that's been most recently helping a virtual care organization, making sure that they can support their patients. It for about a year and a half was making sure people had doctors when they needed them. And during COVID, it was making sure we knew how many people were immunized. But I think you touched on that non-technical, and to pick up on some of what Nicole talked about, which is not just doing the analysis, but making sure people can access it. Nicole talked about it as a visual. It's also about making sure we understand not just what the data is and why people need it, but why it matters. How does this support strategy? How does this deliver value to patients in my world? And so making sure we can talk about that and carry that consistent top line all the way through. A lot of it is about emotional intelligence. Sarah, you talked about trust in your last answer. And, we ask questions. I joke when you have someone's data, you have a little bit of their, well, I guess sometimes a little bit of their dirty laundry, right? Because data tells you the good things, but it also tells you the not so good things. And so approaching that with kindness and compassion and an attempt to do better. It can also be helping people see further. There's a lot of buzzwords in our industry. And so making sure that we're in good shape and we're sort of transforming those buzzwords into actionable use cases. I think, Nicole, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of just add to what you said, specifically for us, the three of us working as consultant architects, I think that the additional value there is that we very quickly learn on behalf of our clients, right? We learn, like you say, it's the technical, but also the meaning behind, the significance, the importance, and then we represent that in a lot of meetings, because to successfully achieve the alignment and the right decisions and the right data, and that each of us are trying to get to. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that happens, and we're able to do that on behalf of our clients, who often are trying to do these new programs and initiatives and projects off the side of the full-time jobs that they're already doing, right? And so as consultant architects, a big, I think, part of what we're bringing to the table is that really deep knowledge that we pick up about understanding our client, and then being able to represent that in meetings and being able to bring that forward for them on their behalf, so that it's heard in all of these different meetings. I think many of us are, right. We then take that information, and we are in all of these meetings with these different teams and all these different people to try and make sure that perspective is represented in all of the discussions and always present. I think we're ready to take on some questions here. So let's see what's our first question coming up. So we have, one moment.
While you search for that, Nicole, maybe I can ask Cheryl, like, we've all touched upon how this industry or this expertise has changed and how there's the need to continuously learn. And now we hear all the hype around AI, Gen AI, and other technologies, high performance computing, edge computing. What are you most excited about as your role as a data architect?
Oh, I think one of the sea changes we saw out of COVID was everyone became an armchair epidemiologists, and I was joking with my hubby that we're now armchair economists as well. We have so much more awareness of the power of data and how much data there is. And we're also really starting to talk about how bias, how different groups might be over or underrepresented, and how we address that. And so I'm really excited about some of the transformations that are going to happen, because data is not just in our systems, it's the Internet of Things. From a healthcare perspective, it's technology that gives us data, so wearable devices and that good sort of thing. And I'm also really excited about the power of generative AI to let us ask better questions of our data. So right now, if you want to ask questions of data, you really have to understand how that data is structured. You have to understand maybe SQL or Python or R. If you want to use AR, you've got to be able to put that into TensorFlow. And I think one of the things that generative AI may do for us is the power of me just being able to ask a question in natural language as an end user or as a citizen and get a sensible answer back.
Yeah, I love how agentic AI, some of these new solutions, we're seeing them embedded not only on the front end where the end user can interact, like a ChatGPT or Copilot, but also the opportunity they create in the back end and how they work together. So we have a question, and we'll get to in a moment, around certain tasks that can be manually done. Well, now with agentic AI, we're seeing that we can automate some of these tasks, in our pipelines, that can work together. So traditionally, AI was one kind of discrete thing that did one discrete function. But now they communicate and work together, and that really gives us efficiencies. It allows team members to focus on, more challenging, interesting work, being more around judgment work that involves judgment, knowledge workers, rather than doing these repetitive tasks. So I think the agentic AI is a really hot topic in our field. I don't know, Nicole, have you seen that or any other trends?
I think the trend, if I think about trends that I'm excited about, that I've been seeing, I really, from what I do, I really enjoyed seeing the trend over time of that increased focus on the user and human-centered design. So there's a lot of exciting growth, I think, in that area as well. And I've really enjoyed that's become kind of a central discussion point, that it's not always being driven also just from the business side, but you're finding more increasingly that people with all different areas of expertise in technology and the more technical roles it's kind of trickled out, and you're hearing that from everybody in the room. So I really enjoyed that transition, and I'm excited to see more of that focus moving forward, working with teams. I do have there's a question here. I'm going to, Cheryl, the first one is for you. So I'll read it out for you. And the question is for Cheryl, as a data architect, do you execute SQL queries to combine tables in SQL servers and clean up data? I see this as tasks for system implementation projects where legacy systems are replaced by a new system. I see this data cleanup as a task prior to data migration.
That's a really, really great question. And I'm going to answer it in a couple different ways. One of the things that I love about being a data architect is we do this thing I call hack and yak, which means we both do some pretty technical work. So, yep, some of that stuff. SQL is one of the things that I spend some time in. But we also talk about why we do these sorts of things and if we should continue to do these sorts of things. Data migration is definitely my jam. It's one of my favorite things to do, which makes me abnormal, I acknowledge. But one of the things that I spend a certain amount of time talking about as a data architect is really to pick up on what Sarah did. Should we keep doing this? A lot of what we have traditionally done in data has been a little bit, I call it duct tape and baling wire, right? We have used all sorts of things to make processes work, to get data where it needs to be in the format it needs to be. And we never really talk about sustainability. We don't talk about scalability. We don't talk about efficiency. And so a good chunk of what I do is say, hey, we're doing this. Should we keep doing it? Should we keep doing it the way we're doing it? Should the people who are doing it, how can we spend less time cleaning up the data and more time using the data in useful ways?
Yeah, and I just add on to that with a cloud perspective. Often there's different ways to migration, 6, 7, 8 hours, depending on what organization you're from. We see clients that have a burning bridge. Their data center contract is up for renewal and they have 6 months to get on the cloud. So in those sort of circumstances, we will just lift and shift what we have for continuity to make sure we have it. That's not the ideal approach, but the reality is that happens in certain instances. Now what we see is we want to modernize. We want to totally refactor when we go to the cloud. We don't want to just necessarily take what we have and put it somewhere else. We want to make sense of it, like Cheryl said. We have so many more options available to us. Do we really want to have that kind of structured relational database, or do we want to put it into a data lake where we can actually do more interesting analysis and analytics with it? So those questions are really driven by how is the business going to use this data? So I see there's many different pathways. And even in terms of cleaning up data, there's so many tools available now. Like if you have a good master data management solution or ETL solution in the cloud, it can automate a lot of that cleanup or help take on some of that legwork. So I do think, and it's changing and evolving as new releases come out for Azure, AWS, Microsoft, Oracle, whatever the vendor may be. So that's definitely a space to watch, definitely more automation. And I would say there's not one approach that fits all. Every approach you define is going to be customer client specific. So I don't think that answers your question perfectly, but realistically, there is no one blueprint in our industry that we can just roll out to every client.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question here. So I'll read one out. If you were to ask your younger self about working in technology, what might you tell her?
Oh, I love this one. I think, the one thing I always tell myself, and it's kind of joking, but half joking, is I always say, I wish I had a psychology degree. I think that's the ultimate trifecta is business, computing, and psychology, because no one engagement is the same. I could go to a client and do a certain cloud migration with certain services over with customer A, and then have exactly the same ask from customer B, and it will be a totally different experience. And I think that goes back to the human factor. The adoption, the success of collaborating is very much depending on finding a way to engage with clients that suits their culture, suits their maturity, and so deciphering how your client wants you to engage and what level of interaction and information they need, and patience and all those fluffy things is really, really valuable. So I probably would have spent more time considering that earlier on, but it's a very exciting ride. So I would totally just have kept doing what I have done in the past. I know, ladies, what are your thoughts? I'm curious to hear.
Maybe I'll hop in. I would say two things. The best piece of advice I got about consulting is they won't remember what you told them, they'll remember how you made them feel. And I think that really picks up on what Sarah was talking about. The other thing I would say, which is perhaps a bit unconventional, is some of the skills I have as a mom, as just a human in the world, are quite transferable to technology, right? You know, Sarah's talked a lot about patience, and if my kids have taught me anything, they've probably tried to teach me that. About kindness, about meeting people where they're at, about listening for the things they say and the things that they don't say, and helping them bridge that gap. And again, surprisingly non-technical. That I guess what I would tell younger Cheryl is a lot of technical work is non-technical, it's human work. So I think with that, Nicole, do you have anything very quickly to add?
You know, it's funny. I had exactly the same initial thought as well, right? Is that I would go back, and I think when I used to think of what IT is and what the industry was, it is very focused on the technology and just understanding what a huge breadth of different types of roles and different types of skills are involved, and that there's really there's just room for so many different opportunities and so many different interests, and there's such a variety of options. So yeah, I wish if I'd known that earlier, I probably would have gone into it sooner. And yeah, so yeah, but I think Sarah, did you have any kind of final remarks you want to add in?
No, that's great. I just say thank you everyone for taking the time out and joining us today. I've had a blast. It's great learning about what my colleagues do. If you want further information, remember to visit our booth, and we have colleagues there happy to answer any further questions. And also, when we finish here, you're going to see a QR code on our screen. We would love to have your feedback, so please take the time, send us some your thoughts. Once again, thanks so much. Have a great day.